It expands. And the knowledge of God isn't something you keep to yourself. The knowledge of the resurrected Christ is not something you keep to yourself. It's something you share. It just overflows. But there are all kinds of inhibitions we have. There are fears that we generate over time. And we need sometimes somebody to help us work through those things. Eric Sammons joins me in the next hour to look at the new evangelization and the old evangelization and what's the difference and how does it apply to us today. Stay with me. I'm Al Cresta.
This hour of Cresta in the Afternoon is co-produced by Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
At Mary Immaculate Catholic School in Farmers Branch, our dedicated faculty help students and their families come to know the person of Jesus Christ as they strive for college and heaven. We are enrolling now for the 2021-2022 school year. My name is Sister Mary Ann Zuberbuehler. I'm a Nashville Dominican sister and the principal at Mary Immaculate School. To learn more about how your child can be immersed in the truth, beauty, and goodness of a Catholic education at Mary Immaculate, visit mischool.org. God bless you.
All KATH 910 AM listeners are invited to a bilingual mini-retreat to learn about Sister Faustina and God's message of divine mercy. The event takes place on Saturday, May 1st from 9 a.m. until 12 noon and will take place at the Catholic Conference and Formation Center in Dallas. Guest speaker is Marianne Rona. The retreat also includes adoration, exposition of relics, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and lunch and fellowship. For more information and to register, email ccfcdal.org.
The Guadalupe Radio Network thanks Little Elm Eye Care for their support of local Catholic radio. Little Elm Eye Care is owned by Drs. Bert and Leslie Bubella, parishioners of St. Francis of Assisi Parish in Frisco. They specialize in family vision care, comprehensive eye exams, contact lenses, and the treatment of eye diseases and injuries. Little Elm Eye Care is located at 1200 East El Dorado Parkway, Suite 100, across from the Little Elm Athletic Complex. They can be reached by calling 972-2920-900 or on the web at littleelmeyecare.com. All Saints Catholic Church in Dallas invites all KATH 910 AM listeners to participate in an online presentation on the reflections of Saint Joseph based on the apostolic letter of Pope Francis called Patrice Corday. The Reflections on Saint Joseph premieres on the 8th of every month through December 2021 at noon on the parish's website at allsaintsdallas.org/church and on the All Saints Dallas Catholic Church social media channels.
KATH 910 AM sponsor Sacred Heart Books and Gifts in Dallas is your one-stop shop for all things Catholic. Religious books for all ages, unique gifts for every Catholic celebration, and much more. Our local Catholic bookstores need our support. Sacred Heart Books and Gifts is located at the northwest corner of Coit and Campbell Road in far north Dallas. Visit today or call them at 972-250-2100. That's 972-250-2100.
Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth. Catholic radio for your soul in North Texas on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone. Celebrating 2,000 years of truth. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul. Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome to this week's edition of Back to the Father, a show exclusively about the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologia. But don't go away, okay? We try to make it fun. I know it can be a little intimidating, but we're glad you're here. And we do always appreciate your participation. Either it's on our social media platforms or by calling in. We love when you participate and let us know if this is making sense to you. I find it very, very important to learn classic Thomistic philosophy, Christian philosophy, and I hope you agree as well. My name is Dave Palmer, host of this program. Diane Xavier is running our board, and she's producing and taking your calls, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. Jonathan von Weber-Hansberg is our intern, and he does a great job. He's running all of our social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Just do @GRN Online, and I saved Sissel for last because, no offense, Sissel, the woman with the hat, they come for the hat, they stay for the Summa. You got a rather
It's a floppy
big
hat. Excuse me. It is a
it's a
floppy
big hat. Yeah.
It feels like a beach hat, and in North Texas where we are located, it is anything but the beach. Today it is very rainy.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I guess the beach has water, but not in this way. It's kind of cold. I feel like I'm encouraging summer.
Yeah,
and it's not working.
Well, I wear a lot of baseball caps, kind of now out of necessity, because unlike you, I've got a big bald spot on the top of my head, and it's not good to be out in the sun when you've got a big bald spot. So I'm thinking I have to get like a classy hat too, like a fedora.
I think
so we might have all of us wearing hats in the show before too long. Well, this is, like I said, Back to the Father, and you can go on the social media platforms. We love when you comment. We got some regular folks that comment on a regular basis. We like if you're new and you just tell us, hey, I got this thought, or, this didn't make sense. Can you re-explain this? Go to Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, and we'd love to hear from you. Today, we are going to talk on the program about two competing worldviews. One is espoused by Christians, focusing on our relationship with God, and in particular at how it relates to providence, free will, and predestination. Okay, if I were to ask you, if Thomas Aquinas, which he does, has a question in the Summa Theologia basically saying, are men predestined by God? What would you think he would say, Sissel, now that you've already seen you know the answer to this, but what do you think he would say?
Well, see, you gotta realize, Dave, of course, I grew up Protestant and Presbyterian. I would have said that he would have said no, because with the word predestination to me, it speaks John Calvin.
Yeah, right.
And so I would have said no.
Okay. Well, you may be in for a surprise, but we got to kind of, flesh it out and explain it all. But I just want to ask you, those listening, how much of your life do you feel is predetermined? Do you believe in fate? Do you believe in free will? Of course, as Christians, we believe in free will. Do you feel like there is some element of predestination that is part of our life? I'll tell you what Thomas Aquinas has to say about it. The other worldview, which we're going to talk about in the third segment, is focused on the here and now. It doesn't have to do with God directing our lives. It's based on the philosophy of 19th century German philosopher Georg Hegel and his famous Hegelian dialectic, okay? And Jonathan, I got to give him credit. He's a high school student. He comes in today, and I said, hey, we'll be talking about predestination and, Hegelian dialectic. And he's like, oh, good. He was really excited about it. So I know some of you are thinking, oh, this is too deep. It's crazy, but I got it. And I don't mean to shame you, but, I teach the whole Summa Theologia to high school students. Wednesday of this week, I had my 24th and final class. Most of them have an A in the course. I have a 13-year-old girl in the class by the name of Nora. She has an A-plus average. And so I told Nora the other day, I said, I try to teach this to adults, and sometimes they say it's too deep. And so a 13-year-old can get this.
No shame. No shame, but a 13-year-old. Dave's just subtly hinting at that.
No shame.
What if she's a genius, though? A child genius?
Well, she might be. But there's a lot of... We're all geniuses in one way or the other, okay? So free will, predestination, providence. What else can you ask for on Catholic radio, right? And so let's get right to it. And again, the first segment is teaching. It's pretty much just me going through a PowerPoint presentation. If you do go to our social media platforms, it'll help a lot. I know sometimes you're in the car and it's just totally impossible to do that. I try to make it that if you're just listening, it still makes perfect sense, hopefully. But if you are able to go to the social media platforms, you can follow along on that platform and see the words and see the parts of the Summa that I read about, okay? And also in the second segment, we talk about it. That's when Jonathan and Sissel jump in. They ask any questions, clarification. We read your comments on social media. And in the third segment, we say, why does this matter? Why do we need to spend our time learning the Summa Theologia? How does it apply to everyday life? I think today I'll make the case about how this definitely does apply. All right, so by way of introduction, as I alluded to a moment ago, in the first part of the Summa, question 23, article 1, Thomas asks whether men are predestined by God. Okay, it's pretty point blank. Okay, are we predestined by God? I'm not going to give you the answer yet, but I will here in a few minutes, okay? When we talk about our relationship to God and the relationship of all creatures to God, one of the common images that Thomas Aquinas uses in the Summa Theologia is an archer who is shooting an arrow to a target. And what he's basically getting at is that God is directing all creatures to their end. Okay, it sounds very predestination-ish, doesn't it? Because, when we shoot an arrow, we are sending it directly to the target, exactly where we want to go. I like an image better when it comes to us. And the image I like, and Thomas does not use this one in the Summa, but I use, and I've talked about this a number of times, the boomerang. Okay, have you ever thrown a boomerang? I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to get that thing out there and then to come right back to you. I like that analogy in that God creates us and then he draws us back to himself. And so if we're the perfect boomerang, we are going to come right back from whence we came, right back to our Creator, right back to the one who, in essence, kind of threw us out. Okay, this is classic teleology we're talking about now. I mentioned before there are 3 themes in the Summa that I like to mention: nature, teleology, and epistemology. Teleology means that God is directing all things to their end. And we see in nature that things work for a purpose. Okay, I'll give you a few examples. I was driving the other day and I saw a bird, and the bird was kind of like, looking around in the grass and picking up these twigs, and it had this perfect twig, and clearly it was preparing to build a nest, right? But it just does that. Birds build nests, and ants build mounds, and beavers build dams, okay? And nobody really thinks that they wake up in the morning and they're planning this, okay? They're just programmed to do what God has programmed to do. That's teleology, okay? But God directs all things to their final end. If you remember one of the first shows that we did on the Summa, we talked about the 5 proofs for the existence of God. Now, Sissel has them all memorized, okay? Jonathan has them all memorized too, right?
Absolutely.
The last one was my favorite. Some people call it the proof through intelligence or intelligent design. I like to call it the governance of the world. And it's basically the same thing. It's all teleology, where when you see ducks flying south or spiders building webs, or you witness the composting process or photosynthesis, which you can't really see, but we know it happens, everything is working towards its proper end. Okay, there's some intelligence behind this, and what Thomas says is that we observe that some things in the world lack intelligence, like worms and bugs and lizards and snakes and, cheetahs, but they still act for an end. Okay, they're still directed to an end to achieve a best result. Okay, they're designed this way. They're directed by an intelligent being as the arrow is directed to the target by the archer. Okay, this is classic teleology. We're also going to talk about providence. You could also say providence. You could also say predestination in a sense as well. But how does this all jive with free will? Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, I'm going to highlight a few articles, and then we're going to take a break. And then we're going to see how you're handling all this. Is it making sense to you? In the 5th question of the Summa, Article 4, Thomas says, does goodness have the aspect of a final cause? Okay, if you remember the attributes of God, the 3rd one was that God is good. Okay, it's not so much God is good, God is goodness. God is goodness itself, all right? So if goodness has the aspect of a final cause, Thomas says, goodness is that which all things desire. And since this has the aspect of an end, it is clear that goodness implies the aspect of an end. Okay, so our end is God. We all desire goodness. We all desire God. Okay, this is classic, the arrow to the target, right? God is directing himself back to us like the boomerang. So all these good things that we experience in life, like dogs and ice cream cones and peacocks and butterflies and children and pizza, okay, they all have an element of goodness. If they didn't, then we wouldn't be attracted to them. We wouldn't want them in the first place, okay? So then, in the second part of the Summa, Thomas asks a question: does man will all whatsoever he wills for the last end? Okay, so this is where it gets kind of interesting, because then you got to say, is everything that we do, everything that we're attracted to, all of our actions, is it all directed to our final end? And I like to use I don't know if puzzles existed back in the 13th century, but you think about a puzzle, okay? Let's say you got a 1,000-piece puzzle, and you got them all the puzzle pieces, they're in front of you. You pick up that first, corner piece, and you're going to put it in. Well, you're doing that in light of the final end. You've got the final end in mind. You know what it's going to look like because you've seen the cover of the box, right? But every time you do something, it's towards the end. And so Thomas says in the Summa, man must of necessity desire all whatsoever he desires for the last end. This is evident for two reasons. First, because whatever man desires, he desires it under the aspect of good. And if he desire it not as his perfect good, which is his last end, it must of necessity desire it as tending to the perfect good, because the beginning of anything is always ordained to its completion, as is clearly the case in effects both of nature and of art. Wherefore, every beginning of perfection is ordained to complete perfection, which is achieved through the last end. Okay, now, practical application of the Summa Theologia, does that not change the way you live? That everything you do, everything you're drawn to, everything that's good participates in the goodness of God. We've talked about this before, but I don't think we can emphasize it enough. All right, so then, in another article of the Summa, Thomas says, does the will desire anything of necessity? Okay, is there anything we have to want? Is there anything that we desire out of necessity and not out of free will? And I would highlight in this, think even from a sensitive appetite. Did any of you wake up this morning and say, I have decided to be hungry? I have decided to want a glass of water. I have decided that I want friends today. I've decided, think about even professionally, you might be a doctor or a lawyer. Was there some element of that you didn't really decide, but you're just drawn to it? Were you drawn to a certain perfection, drawn to a certain, state of life, drawn maybe to the priesthood? Again, just something to think about. Is there a certain drawing, that boomerang up in the air that's coming back to the Father, so to speak, that we don't entirely have control of? Okay, just something to consider. All right, Thomas says, now, this necessity of coercion is altogether repugnant to the will, okay? For we call that violent, which is against the inclination of a thing. But the very movement of the will is an inclination to something. Therefore, as a thing is called natural because it is according to the inclination of nature, so a thing is called voluntary because it is according to the inclination of the will. So yes, we have free will. We are able to choose things. But how much of that is choice and how much of that is, us being drawn to what our will is already drawn to? Therefore, just as it is impossible for a thing to be at the same time violent and natural, so it is impossible for a thing to be absolutely coerced or violent and voluntary. In like manner, neither is natural necessity repugnant to the will. Indeed, more than this, for as the intellect of necessity adheres to the first principles, the will must of necessity adhere to the last end, which is happiness, okay? Everybody wants to be happy, and you don't have a choice, okay? Everybody, without exception, wants to be happy, and so in that regard, you do not have free will. Okay, nobody can say, I do not want to be happy, okay? Because all you'd be saying is, whatever I determine to be unhappiness is what makes me happy. And so you can't win that one, right? All right, let's move on. okay, does God impose necessity on things willed? Okay, does God impose? Now we're getting into this whole idea of how much is God kind of forcing us towards that target, okay, shooting that arrow towards the target. And Thomas says the divine will imposes necessity on some things willed, but not on all. Since then, the divine will is perfectly efficacious. It follows not only that things are done which God wills to be done, but also that they are done in the way that he wills. Now, God wills some things to be done necessarily and some contingently to the right ordering of things for the building up of the universe. Therefore, to some effects, he has attached necessary causes. Okay, the bird building the nest, the beaver building the dam, the ducks flying south, no choice, that cannot fail. But to others, defectible and contingent causes from which arise contingent effects. Hence, it is not because the proximate causes are contingent that the effects willed by God happen contingently, but because God prepared contingent causes for them, it being his will that they should happen contingently. So even our choices, in a sense, are prepared by God. Okay, so again, is this making sense? Cecil can tell me in the second segment. Okay, does this make sense? All right, then we get into providence. Okay, this is probably a word you're more familiar with. Providence, is it attributed to God? Thomas says, it is necessary to attribute providence to God. For all the good that is in created things has been created by God, as was shown above. In created things, good is found not only as regards their substance, but also as regards their order towards an end, and especially their last end, which is the divine goodness. This good of order existing in things created is itself created by God. Since, however, God is the cause of things by his intellect, and thus it behooves that the type of every effect should pre-exist in him, it is necessary that the type of the order of things toward their end should pre-exist in the divine mind, and the type of things ordered toward an end is, properly speaking, providence. Okay, so again, yes, God is directing things to their end, all things to their end, and to some he allows for contingent causes and choices, but in the end, he still is directing all the shots. Okay, it's interesting. All right, so we got a couple more here, and then we are going to take a break and then come back and take your calls. Let me know if this is making sense to you, or if it's totally Greek in a sense, or if this is making sense, okay? Thomas says in another article in the Summa, is everything subject to the providence of God? Everything. Is everything subject to the providence of God? And he says there is a difference between universal and particular causes. A thing can escape the order of a particular cause, but not the order of a universal cause. For nothing escapes the order of a particular cause except through the intervention and hindrance of some other particular cause. Since then, all particular causes are included under the universal cause, it could not be that any effect should take place outside the range of that universal cause. So far, then, as an effect escapes the order of a particular cause, it is said to be casual or fortuitous in respect to that cause. For if we regard the universal cause, outside whose range no effect can happen, it is said to be foreseen. I've used examples on this show about bringing candy home for my kids or blowing leaves with my son, and how in the end it's going to work out the way I want it to, but I'm still in that overall system allowing for choices to be made, but in the end my will be absolutely fulfilled, okay? All right, so now we get to the question about predestination. Whether men are predestined by God. And again, I was shocked the first time I heard this, because when I think of predestination, like Cecil said, I think of John Calvin. He lived in the 16th century, died 1564, and father of Calvinism, double predestination, no free will, you're going to heaven, you're going to hell, you got nothing to say about it. What does Thomas have to say about this? Okay, directly from the Summa, he says, it is fitting that God should predestine men. All right, there you go. It is fitting that God should predestine men. But let's hear what he says. For all things are subject to his providence. Now it belongs to providence to direct things towards their end. The end towards which created things are directed by God is twofold. One which exceeds all proportion, and faculty of created nature, and this end is life eternal, that consists in seeing God, which is above the nature of every creature. The other end, however, is proportionate to created nature, to which end created being can attain according to the power of the nature, okay? Some things we can do, some things we can't do without God's help. Now, if a thing cannot attain to something by the power of its nature, it must be directed thereto by another. Thus, an arrow is directed by the archer towards a mark. Hence, properly speaking, a rational creature capable of eternal life is led towards it, directed, as it were, by God. The reason of that direction pre-exists in God, as in him is the type of the order of all things towards an end, which we prove above to be providence. Now, the type in the mind of the doer of something to be done is a kind of pre-existence in him of the thing to be done. I used the example earlier talking to Cecil and Jonathan about, I'm going to drive to home when I finish the show today. It's already in my mind. I already know what I'm going to do. I already have it planned out. So in a sense, that drive home is predestined, right? Because I've already figured it out in my mind which roads I'm going to take. It already is in my mind, right? Even though it hasn't happened yet, right? Hence, the type of the aforesaid direction of a rational creature towards the end of life eternal is called predestination. For to destine is to direct or send. Thus, it is clear that predestination, as regards its objects, is part of providence. Okay, so Thomas is a predestinationist in a sense, but he doesn't take away free will. He asks in another article, is predestination certain? He says yes. Okay, so finally, here we go. Does man have free will? Okay, this is a direct question. Are we robots? Are we going to heaven or hell? We got nothing to say about it. Or do we have free will? Thomas says, man has free will. Otherwise, counsels, exhortations, commands, prohibitions, rewards, and punishments would be in vain. In order to make this evident, we must observe that some things act without judgment, as a stone moves downwards, and in like manner all things which lack knowledge. And some act from judgment, but not a free judgment, such as brute animals, dogs, cats, cheetahs. But he didn't say that, I said that. But man acts from judgment, because by his apprehensive power he judges that something should be avoided or sought, but because this judgment, in the case of some particular act, is not from natural instinct, but from some act of comparison in the reason, therefore he acts from free judgment and retains the power of being inclined to various things. Now, particular operations are contingent, and therefore in such matters the judgment of reason may follow opposite courses and is not determinate to one. So we're not forced to do one thing. We're not forced to sin. We're not forced to be virtuous, okay? Otherwise it wouldn't be virtue. All right, so that's it. Okay, why does it matter? Did it make sense? I'm going to sweeten the deal here, okay? We're going to take a break now. And I am holding in my hand, you might see, this awesome tapestry that I was given yesterday, a bunch of these, by a gentleman and a friend of mine who came into the studio in celebration of the year of St. Joseph. If during the next two segments you call in and you have a legitimate question and you get on the air with us and ask that question or make a comment, let us know how this is all making sense to you or not, I'm going to send one of these to you, okay? So Diane will screen the calls, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. It's an official tapestry, 8 by 11, of St. Joseph and Jesus. I've got different versions of it. I do want to thank Ricardo Flores is the gentleman who gave it to me. He's with a company called Made by Catholics. yearofstjoseph.us is where you get those, okay? But the easiest way to get them is to call in and be part of our show and talk about predestination, providence, free will, teleology, all these, big words of things we talked about. Does it make sense? Can you see how free will and predestination can pre-exist in the way that Thomas Aquinas describes it? Let's hear from you. 877-757-9424. If you call in, be brave. I'll send you one of these tapestries of St. Joseph and Jesus. And also, don't forget, on our social media platforms, YouTube and Facebook, if you're watching, comment there as well. We've already got a few comments, I believe. And we'd love to hear what you have to say. Okay? YouTube, Facebook, just do @grnonline.com. This is Back to the Father, quick break, and we'll be back to discuss this right after this.
We'll be back with more of Back to the Father after this. Please join the conversation by calling 877-757-9424 or join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
Your Odyssey begins at the University of Dallas, the premier Catholic liberal arts university in Texas. With campuses in Irving and Italy, UD's rigorous core curriculum sets it apart. An education rooted in the great works of Catholic and Western tradition. An education that ennobles and enables students in the pursuit of wisdom, truth, and virtue. Undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs are available. Start your college odyssey at the University of Dallas today. Go to udallas.edu to learn more.
Thank you for listening to the Guadalupe Radio Network and being part of the family. Families pray for each other. We would be honored if you would let us pray with you and for you. You don't even have to tell us your name. Just go to our website, grnonline.com, or call our prayer request line and leave us a message at 800-395-4008. That's 800-395-4008. We will be praying for you every day.
I don't know why I turned on my radio, because I've kept my radio off for years, because there's so much trash. And once I turned it on, I was absolutely hooked. I actually was gone from the Catholic Church for 35 years. I want to get to heaven. I don't know if I will. I worry about it. But I not only want to get to heaven at the moment of my death, I want to find as much heaven as possible here on earth. I love the shows with the Catholic apologist. I love the shows with the sort of day-to-day psychologist, Greg and Lisa Popchak. I love hearing not just of other people's problems who call in, but I love getting the Catholic take on how to deal with day-to-day reality. If your purpose in life is to find God, not just here, but after you die, then living out that purpose is going to color absolutely everything you do.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.
All right, we're back. This is Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. It's a show exclusively, I think the only show on Catholic radio anywhere that exclusively focuses on the Summa Theologia by St. Thomas Aquinas. Dave Palmer, Cecil Anderson, Diane Xavier running the board, and we do have a call that has come through, and also Jonathan is our intern, and he likes to chime in. We gave him a hard time because it used to be that he'd only talk like in the first 5 minutes, and people would, tune out after they know Jonathan's not going to be on, but now you can hear Jonathan anytime during the show. Let's go to the call. This is a brave person calling from San Antonio. Again, if you want to call in and you have a question, I want to send you one of these tapestries. They're really beautiful. If you're looking on the live stream, I have 3 different versions of Joseph and Jesus. 877-757-9424, talking about predestination, free will, and providence. And we're going to talk about Hegelian dialectic in the next segment. We'll lighten it up a little bit with some Hegelian dialectic talk. All right.
Thanks.
Elizabeth in San Antonio. Hi, Elizabeth. You're so brave. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you. I've got a nephew that is forever posing questions to me, and he said, Aunt Liz, if man supposedly has free will, does that mean, when he dies, he or she dies, and there is another life? Of course, he's putting all of these ifs. Does he have the free will on the other side to sin?
You're talking about presuming that they're in heaven, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a great question, and Thomas actually addresses this late in the Summa, in the supplement, which is the very end of the Summa, and it would be it's a perfect question, Elizabeth, because a person continues to have free will. Jesus had free will. Mary had free will, but Jesus never sinned. Why? Because his will was perfectly lined up with God. And so when we're in heaven, in the glory of God, and we're actually united to God, and it's amazing how Thomas describes heaven, we would have no interest in sinning because you are experiencing the beatific vision, and it's kind of like a virtue means that we are habitually choosing what's good, right? And so you would habitually desire all that is good, but you continue to have free will. That doesn't take away your free will, but you have classic perfect free will because you never desire anything outside of God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I thought along those lines, except that he tends to be very testy. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just check with the experts.
Yeah. I hope
this is perfect.
Yeah. Is he married or single?
Yes.
I'm engaged. Oh, perfect.
He's married.
Oh, okay, married. Tell him. Imagine, and I'm sure he loves his wife, and he loves her with all his heart, and he just wants to do everything he possibly can. He would never even want to ever hurt his wife or his daughter, and so yes, he has free will, but the idea of harming them or doing anything wrong would just would mortify him, and that might be a human example.
And I guess the fact that let's say that soul makes it to heaven, why on earth would he even want to sin?
Yeah.
Other than just do good, look after. Yeah, I get it, and I will refer him to St. Thomas Aquinas. Summa Theologica, is that what it is?
Yeah, and he could take the express lane and just listen to this show, and he wouldn't even have to read it. But no, I do recommend everybody read it if they are so inclined. And it was a really great question, perfectly in line with what we're talking about. So, Elizabeth, thank you very much. We're glad you're listening. Appreciate it very much. All right. Hopefully we get a few more of those kind of calls. And we are going to send her the St. Joe. I sometimes think like if we give stuff away, people just call in just because they want to win something. But
that was a good question.
Yeah, that was a very good question. Puts a little pressure on you, Sissel, to think of some good questions. Huh?
I was just going to leave it to the people listening,
Let me get out the phone number again, 877-757-9424. And I just want to say, we have become very casual as a culture, the way we dress, and I'm right there. I like to dress down, and the way we speak. I think about like in the 1980s when that game came out, Trivial Pursuit, right? And it's like a whole bunch of just kind of filling your head with a bunch of knowledge, and a lot about, sports and history, but it's not. Does that really help you that much? To just know a whole bunch of facts, or should we know a worldview about how we should structure our lives, how we relate to God? This kind of stuff is challenging, but like I said, I have discussions every week with high school students about this, and I think we need to talk about these kind of things, even if it's challenging. And again, sometimes it's difficult because I'm not explaining it well enough, but there is a simplicity about it because an arrow being shot to a target, that's about as simple as you can get. You could explain that to a 3-year-old, right?
Right.
And say that's how God is moving things to their final end. A duck or a squirrel or anything that doesn't have free will is just like that arrow. I could explain that to any 3-year-old, and I think they would understand that. And so, again, and I'm not... I think we can all understand this, and Thomas writes in a very complicated way sometimes, but I just think it's important. I think it's worth the effort to try to figure this stuff out. And in the third segment, we're going to talk about why does it matter, and I want to talk to you about the Hegelian dialectic, another light topic, and then I'll tell you about what does a philosophy look like when it's not based on God, when it's entirely materialistic. And it might look somewhat like what our culture looks like today. I'll
give you a prime example.
I'll give you a little hint. So anyways, we're getting some calls coming in, so thanks. Diane is busily. If it's ringing, just keep trying, because Diane's just one person. She isn't bilocating yet. 877-757-9424. We might just take a whole bunch of calls and some comments on social media too,
Yeah,
Sissel?
definitely. So Adrian has asked, what do you think about the Molodism versus Thomist debate? I don't know if it's Molinism or Molinism. I apologize if that's wrong. Are you aware?
Gosh, I've said this before, and I, one thing, I learned from, John Martinoni in Apologetics. When you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know, and I'll go find out. But maybe Adrian can tell us about it, because he sent me some videos recently that I think may have had to do with this. And so I'm going to claim ignorance on that, Adrian, but please either call in or put on the chat room, because I want to know about this I can't even pronounce it, much less explain it.
I was hoping that you would just magically be able to correct me if I said it wrong. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
We also have Michelle on Facebook who asks, what about a predator who preys on a victim and the vulnerable and the effects and lives of conditions of others? I'm assuming she's talking about, if your free will preys on others and how it affects
whether
others.
you choose
to do something evil.
Is that predestination? Like, is God directing that?
I think that's
well. Again, this is contingent. We talk about contingencies. It means that we have choices, but in the overarching plan, God's will is always going to be fulfilled, and it's a great mystery, and it's hard to understand, but. And I think the best example, if Michelle's still listening, is that if we didn't have free will, we can't love. Okay, Thomas would say that a squirrel does not love.
Right.
An earthworm does not love. And close your ears, dog lovers. Thomas would even say dogs don't love. Although it seems sometimes like there's maybe like a little spectrum there that dogs have maybe some degree of affection, of course. But the only way we can be virtuous is if we have free will. And the only way we can have free will is if there is the allowance of evil. Because if there's no evil and everybody was perfect, there would be no love and there would be no free will. Okay? And that's the best way I can explain it. And God allows evil in order to bring out a better good. Okay? We are getting just slammed with calls. Did you have anything, Sissel, or do you want me to go straight to calls?
You can go straight to calls because actually we got a comment on social media that I can also kind of talk about as well in a little bit.
All right. So let's go. Michelle, I don't know if this is the same Michelle or not. Michelle in Dallas, thanks for calling back to the Father. What's your question or comment? Thank you for calling.
Yes, I was the one who made the comment. Because you look to conditions of free will in the fact of human trafficking, or is evils that occur, in some ways, some of these writings seem very luxurious in their concepts of acceptance of free will, in the concepts, but when you experience or as a calling to help others that have been preyed upon, what I guess that's what I was getting at is some of this seems very luxurious, assuming you're dealing with good people. When you're dealing with evil entities, it's very hard to embrace these concepts.
The concept in regard to God, do you mean, or just that there's free will? Do you mean specifically that God would allow this, or that God is, directing this and like an arrow to a target, that kind of thing? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like the arrow to the target. I can see how good can come out of evil, but when you're in the fight, when you're in the struggle, how does that play out? Because that's, it's really easy to talk about the end game, but it's the journey in the middle that is really difficult with free will.
Yeah. You mentioned, I think you mentioned about human trafficking. I saw a movie, I don't know, there was a guy, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was a singer for King and Country, and it was about trafficking. Do you remember that movie? Mm-hmm. And it was about a guy who ended up being hired to take a truck across the country, and it ended up that in the back of his truck were these two trafficked women, and then of course he ends up saving them because he realizes that he was being hired to basically cooperate with human traffickers, but then he becomes the hero. And so I guess you see this good and evil played out. You see the evil of the people that set him up for this, but then it allowed him to step in and do something heroic, something virtuous. And, again, that's the best thing I can think of. The free will of the ones who persecuted and sent Jesus to his death allowed for the greatest thing that's why we call it Good Friday. The greatest gift we've ever had is Christ's death and resurrection. Couldn't have happened without the allowance of evil, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, Michelle, you are like the double whammy today. You were commenting on social media and calling in. So, boy, I ought to send you two things. Thanks for calling, Michelle. Really appreciate it. This is Back to the Father. We're going to have to take a break here in a moment. Thanks for the calls that are coming in. And you're silencing Sissel. Yeah.
Hey, you know what? Maybe that should be everyone's goal. Maybe that's what it is. Everyone's just
Don't
like
let
calling
Sissel
it.
talk. Okay, but
Do we have time before we go to the break for me to say another comment we have from Facebook?
yeah, and Michael and Gertrude, hold on. I'm going to send everybody this tapestry of St. Joseph and Jesus. And I do want to talk about the dialectic in the next segment. So we'll come back and we'll take the calls that we have. And then I want to talk about what's a worldview look like that isn't based on God directing things to the final end? What's a worldview that isn't, everything we will is associated with our final end? What does that look like? Well, we'll tell you what it looks like. It pretty much could come by the name of Marxism. And Marx had a favorite philosopher named Georg Wilhelm Hegel, who Leo XIII warned about in his encyclical Aeterni Patris. But then again, that's the next segment. Okay, go ahead, Sissa. Did you have a comment?
I did. Well, this is actually a comment from Natalie, who used to intern here with us at the
Oh,
station.
Natalie,
she
yes.
commented, and she said her thoughts are very similar to mine. Of some thoughts that I had is being a convert. I remember taking a worldviews class and learned about John Calvin. My teacher brought up a lot of verses about predestination, like Romans 8:29. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. He brought up many more verses like that. Does the Summa say anything about those Bible verses?
Yeah, well, I think not only does it say something about that, but that's what the Thomas's teaching on predestination is based on. I mean, if you say that there's no predestination, well, you'd have to say, well, then St. Paul got that one wrong. And so, but you have to understand it in the context of how we taught about that in a moment. It does not mean that our free will is negated. And that's why there's this balancing act of we are free, but also God has predestined in the sense of the foreknowledge of all things. It doesn't mean that, and again, it's a mystery, and I that's why I like to talk about these kind of things and get your questions, because we can try to figure this all out. And I guarantee Thomas struggled with it as well. How do we conform free will to providence, to teleology, to predestination? But I think what he says is it's the universal and the particular causes. The universal cause, God's will, is always going to be fulfilled, but he loves us enough to give us a choice to turn away from him. But in the end, his will always be fulfilled. So, anyways, great to hear from Natalie. She and Sissel started like in the same week, and then Natalie got married and is having kids and has a wonderful husband and I think at least one child. Mm-hmm. So thanks for watching, Natalie. Good to hear from you. All right, we need to take a break, right? Come back and we'll take some calls and hear from you. Jonathan is being very. We don't know if we're gonna have time for his devil's advocate today or not. We'll be back.
We'll be back with more of Back to the Father after this. Please join the conversation by calling 877-757-9424 or join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
Catholic radio was there for me when I needed it. Even though I didn't think I needed it, it was there for me. I want everybody to know that I'm giving, not so that I can sit there and say that I gave to GRN for any other reason but this. I want that radio station to be there for anyone else who needs it also. They may not think they need it, but it's going to be there for them, whether it's in the future, whether it's right now. I want that radio station to always be there for them, just like it was there for me.
The Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.
Instead of fighting the crowds, isn't it so much easier to hop online and do your shopping in the comfort of your own home? Did you know that you can help the Guadalupe Radio Network when you shop online? All you need to do is shop on Amazon Smile and 0.5% of your purchase goes to the GRN. Just go to AmazonSmile.com and select La Promesa Foundation as your nonprofit of choice. La Promesa is the parent company of Guadalupe Radio. It's that simple to give a little extra help to the Guadalupe Radio Network.
This is Len Oswald, president of the Guadalupe Radio Network, with this week's GRN Family Minute. We hope you and your family had a very blessed Easter week. This is another special week in our Holy Catholic Church. It is Divine Mercy Week. St. John Paul II described Divine Mercy as the answer to the world's problems and the central message of the third millennium. The theme of Divine Mercy was undoubtedly one of the greatest spiritual legacies of his life and pontificate. He saw the great need for souls, yours and mine, to come to know the immensity and greatness of God's mercy. Repeatedly, he wrote and spoke about the need for us to turn to the mercy of God as the answer to the specific problems of our times. Please know that each workday, the GRN staff comes together via conference call at 3 p.m., the hour of divine mercy, to pray the chaplet for your needs and prayer intentions. May God bless you and your families.
Welcome back to the Father. To join the conversation, call 877-757-9424. And please join us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter.
All right, welcome back. This is Back to the Father, Guadalupe Radio Network. We're talking about the Summa Theologia, St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching on predestination and providence and teleology and free will, and how does it all make sense? How can we be predestined in a sense and also have free will? Michael in San Antonio is next. Michael, thank you for calling. What's your comment or question?
Hello, I'm enjoying the discussion. It's very good. So I was wondering, kind of a verse that came to my mind was Romans 7:15, where St. Paul talks about, I don't do what I want, but what I don't want to do is what I do instead. Is there any correlation with that in free will? It kind of seems like. Does Calvin say anything about that?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think that has to do with concupiscence and original sin, and obviously, the very thing, and it's almost like the inordinate relationship of fallen man between our reason and our passions, right? Because it's like in my reason, I know I need to do this, right? I know the truth, but then my passions are St. Paul talks about this, the flesh and the spirit, and that we are in conflict even within ourselves, and I think that's what he's getting at, and that certainly would have to do with free will, because even as the conflict rages within us because of concupiscence and original sin, we have a choice we can make, right? We can go with right reason, or we can go with that. That passion to overindulge, or look at pornography, or lie or gossip, or does that make sense, Michael?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I don't know too much about Calvin. I know he gets associated with predestination, but does Calvin believe, or did he teach that God just chose people that would go to heaven or hell, and that if you're not, or it doesn't matter what you do, your fate's already basically set, so you have no free will, or you have free will, but it doesn't matter. God's, choosing you to heaven or hell. So just, I guess you're lucky if you go to heaven. If not,
yeah. Well, Cecil used to be a Presbyterian, right?
Yes.
So, do you want to answer that? What would they say?
I would say that they would say yes, that it wasn't your choice, and that God did just simply choose some people without looking at who they were, just simply as a condition for loving them and saving them. And so, yes, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah,
that is something that I was a younger teenager, but so I don't know how much I really was thinking about it. But it is interesting. That is something that Presbyterian churches believe.
Yeah, and I have a very good friend who's a Presbyterian Calvinist, and a good Christian, but he believes this. And people like Dr. David Anders used to be a Calvinist Presbyterian, and then he became Catholic, and so that'd be a good call for call to communion sometime, Michael. David Anders could give a much better answer than I could. Thank you for the call. I appreciate both of those questions. They were both very good. Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a good one.
Okay, thanks. And look, we got a call from Alabama. Awesome. Ooh, Trudy from Alabama. Trudy, thanks for calling. Good to hear from you in Mother Angelica land. What's your question or comment?
Just over my head.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. This is not making any sense to you?
Not just not making sense, but it's... Gosh, y'all naming off people, and of course Thomas More I've heard of, but I was wondering about these people who are addicts. And I know they're leaders and they're followers in this world. And even the homeless people. I feel so sorry for them. And I thought, what can we do? And some of my friends said, there's nothing you can do. If they want to live like that, you leave them alone.
Yeah.
And you give them, if they need food, like this one guy, what is Christ in the City? He was giving out little gift cards for food if they wanted food, but he wouldn't give them any money. And I thought, well, they have free will just like I do, and why are they choosing this? And one guy had been robbed, he had been beaten up, and he's still on the street. And if you don't have an address, you can't get a Social Security check.
Yeah. There's one of the church doctors, and I don't know who it was, that said something, and I'm paraphrasing, that if you do not help the homeless, it's equivalent to killing the homeless or the poor. It's like we have an obligation, right, but at the same time, they also have free will. Some of them have made horrible decisions, and it's a tough call because obviously our first responsibilities are our families. I could go and spend 16 hours a day helping the homeless, but then I'm not attending to my wife and children. And I don't know what your state of life is, Trudy, but I don't think I do enough of corporal works of mercy. Mm-hmm. I think it scares me sometimes to think of judgment because I'm like most Americans, have more than I need, and I have excess, right. And so I think how this ties in. We have been given free will, and we can't say, God, I didn't know, on the judgment. And of course, right. Matthew chapter 25, the goats and the sheep, is a pretty harrowing chapter in the Bible when Jesus kind of takes these people to task. Trudy, thanks for the call. Got to let you go, but really glad you're listening there in Alabama, and we'll get one of those tapestries sent over to you. I do want to mention this because one of the things that, even if it's confusing and even if it's hard to understand, I think we need to dig into this because it affects our entire worldview. And that's why I'm a big advocate of teaching Christian philosophy to young people. And I'm talking 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds, age appropriate, and because the worldview is already being formed. We have a worldview right now that I would, and you can call in and debate or agree, but I think it's a very, very secular, humanist, Marxist worldview, and it seems to be getting more so all the time. And I've mentioned before that there was a papal encyclical by my favorite Pope, Leo XIII, back in 1879. It was called Aeterni Patris, The Restoration of Christian Philosophy According to the Mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. Pope Leo XIII, 1879. He blamed the ills in the culture at that time on errant philosophers. Okay, it wasn't MTV or Google or Facebook, which didn't exist back then, or even movies because they didn't exist either. But philosophers, okay, and one of the ones that, and he didn't name names specifically, but one of the ones he had to have had in his radar was Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. German philosopher, died 1831. Okay, this would have been about 40, 50 years before Leo XIII wrote this. Okay, Hegel is responsible for a philosophy called the Hegelian dialectic, and he had great influence on Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, and he was himself influenced by René Descartes. All right, so I want to just read a little bit about this. Hegelian philosophy teaches that social change occurs via conflict upon which all ideas and states of affairs rest. In simple terms, there are two opposing ideas. Debating them allows truth to emerge. Now, most people would say, well, that's kind of what we do, right? We have two different opposing ideas, and then we debate it, right? He also says the Soviet Union was based on the Hegelian dialectic, as is all Marxist writing. Think about this, okay? He says, and I found an article it didn't give a name, okay? This gentleman who wrote, and I'm reading this now, in 1847, the London Communist League used Hegel's theory of the dialectic to back up their economic theory of communism. Now, in the 21st century, Hegelian Marxist thinking affects our entire social and political structure. The Hegelian dialectic is the framework for guiding our thoughts and actions into conflicts that lead us to a predetermined solution. It is a tool which manipulates us into a frenzied circular pattern of thought and action. Hegelian conflicts stir every political arena on the planet, from the United Nations to American politics, all the way down to local school boards and community councils. Dialogues and consensus building are primary tools of the dialectic, and terror and intimidation are also acceptable forms for obtaining the goal. The article goes on. The dialectic is it's active in every political issue that encourages taking sides. We can see it in environmentalists instigating conflicts against private property owners, Democrats against Republicans, Greens against Libertarians, Communists against Socialists, neocons against traditional conservatives, and community activists against individuals, in pro-choice versus pro-life, in Christians against Muslims, in isolationists versus interventionists, in peace activists against war hawks. Basically, what he's getting at is that it is a worldview that is pitting groups against each other, women against men, parents against children, and it's conflict, it's constant conflict, and the solution is always going to be some kind of government. It's going to lead ultimately to a government solution, even in the pro-life debate. Most people are just waiting for that Supreme Court justice and that Supreme Court case that's going to turn everything around, right? The worldview and I'm not accusing all pro-lifers of doing that. Most of them that I know don't. But the worldly solution doesn't work. But perhaps a philosophy where we're actively considering God as directing us while allowing free will, maybe a better understanding of what predestination really means in a Christian perspective, maybe understanding of providence in light of free will, and really tackling these issues and considering them, and always focusing everything that we will on our final end. I think that would be a good way to live, and maybe it's the antidote for the problems that are going on today. Dinah, we're done.
Almost, but we're running out of time. But Jose had a question from San Antonio. He didn't want to go on there. He wanted to know, does an angel have free will even though they have the beatific vision? Absolutely, yes. Yeah, angels in heaven do not lose their free will. What about the damned in hell? Do they still have free will? Well, we'll talk about that next week. Huh?
Nice plug.
All right. Thanks, everybody. God bless you. Thanks, Cecil, Diane, and Jonathan. See you next week.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.
Are you tired of working from home? If so, you're invited to check out WorkSuites, a new sponsor of KATH 910 AM owned by Flip Howard from St. Thomas Aquinas Parish in Dallas. WorkSuites is designed for professionals who desire their own workspace to get their work done. WorkSuites provides amenities such as a receptionist, mail and package handling, meeting rooms, and high-speed internet. To learn more about WorkSuites, you can visit worksuites.com or call 888-312-WORK. That's work, SUITES.com.
Hi, this is Dave Palmer here at the station. I am so thankful for the many ways that you, our listeners,